Welcome, everyone. We are going to have a very interesting episode as we are discussing circadian rhythms and novel applications of intradaily stability and intradaily variability. And we have an amazing guest for this episode. She has master's degree in software engineering from Harvard University and PhD in astrophysics from University College London. Interestingly, she has been developing software algorithms from space telescopes to life and health patterns of sensor data, including characterization of activity and sleep behaviors. Currently, she's working as a senior researcher at Oregon Health and Science University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Dr. Christina Reynolds. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so very nice to have. And we need to start from your background. How did you go from software engineering to astrophysics and then to circadian rhythms?
Well, I originally did a bachelor's degree in astrophysics and math, and I
Mm,
wanted to be an astronomer. And during my bachelor's degree, I really fell in love with telescopes. I spent a lot of time in the observatory. I just loved telescopes. And I knew that I wanted to work on a very specific project for my PhD. I wanted to work on the European Extremely Large Telescope project, which is going to be the largest telescope in the world. It'll be the larger than every existing telescope combined. But I knew that a lot of people wanted to work on that project. So I thought, I'm going to make myself different. So before applying for the PhD, I did a master's degree in software engineering because I knew that that was a skill that they would need that a lot of astronomers might not have. So I did my master's degree in software engineering. And for my master's thesis, I wrote software focused on designing primary mirrors for large telescopes. So I was very focused. And I was accepted into the PhD program at UCL, which I specifically chose because UCL was building the prototype mirror segments for the EELT telescope. And my experience at UCL was amazing. I had the opportunity to write software to drive robots that were used to fabricate the main mirrors of the telescope. So the main
mm,
telescope is broken up into 798 segments in order to create a mirror that's 39 meters across. And in order to do that, we couldn't use traditional optical methods. So the lab at UCL had invented this method of creating mirrors using robotic grinders and polishers. And that's where I joined the team, as I wrote MATLAB software to control these robots to create ultra precision surfaces for the telescope mirrors. So that was my PhD project and how I applied software engineering to astrophysics.
yeah, very, very interesting. So from the very beginning, you knew that you want to work with telescopes. What is fascinating in telescopes? Why is it so interesting?
They are so beautiful. If you ever get the chance to just spend the night with a really large telescope, just the way they move to track the sky or the way they move to go from object to object in the sky, I just found fascinating. They're so graceful, but yet they're these objects of just immense precision, just the way they combined beautiful optics with cutting edge electronics to produce this data. So I was lucky enough as an undergraduate to get the opportunity to visit large professional observatories during my undergraduate studies. And I attended Williams College in Massachusetts, which had a very nice observatory on campus. So I was able to, as an undergrad, spend hundreds of hours with telescopes, and I just completely fell in love with them, just as an object of beauty and also because of what they could do.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And then now you have moved to more to life and health. How did you move from telescopes to your current role and current software things that you are doing?
My interest in neuroscience and neurology was born with my son. My son was born with a brain injury. And in working with arranging his health care and interacting with his doctors, I started just taking classes online about neuroscience and the brain and neurology to understand what it was he was going through. And he's 17 now and he's amazing. He copes with it so well. You would never know that he has this injury because he compensates for it so well. But then at one point, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and needed to make a career shift. I applied to Oregon Health and Science University. They had an opening for a computer programmer, and I ended up not being the right fit for the opening they had, but I had talked about the work I had done in astrophysics and also that I'd taken all these classes online in neuroscience and neurology. And they said, we think your background is interesting. How would you like to join us as a postdoc, postdoctoral fellow in neurology? And I jumped at the chance. So I was able to join OHSU in Portland in the neurology department at the Alzheimer's Center under Dr. Jeffrey Kay. And there I got the chance to learn about interesting new ways to study people. So he was interested in people as they age, both healthy aging and people who may have developed dementias. So we wanted to learn as much about their life patterns as that we possibly could. And my background in software engineering turned out to be very useful in creating MATLAB software to study their data sets. And I've also found that my viewpoint as a physicist, as an astronomer, as someone who works with these large astronomical data sets has been really useful because a lot of times I'll have a different perspective on the data we're working with compared to the neuroscience and neurologists because I have a different background.
Very, very interesting. So more about the different perspective. Do you see it from the moon, or like how is it different? Like they have been studying the brain from inside in a way. You have been looking different kind of data sets. Do you have? Can you describe any idea how is it different that you see? This might be a challenging question.
I will pick up on patterns in a different way. I do a lot of work with EEG data and EMG data to look for unusual movements and muscle. One of the things my group is studying is REM behavior disorder, which is a disorder where your brain doesn't do what it should do during the REM cycle of sleep. Normally during REM sleep, your body is paralyzed. You're not moving. You're not acting out your dreams. REM behavior disorder it occurs in veterans disproportionately. And it can be a dangerous and frightening disorder because people will act out their dreams and they will especially act out violent or frightening dreams. And that is dangerous for the person. It's dangerous for their family, for their bed partners. It's also of strong interest because people who have REM behavior disorder have a much higher chance of developing Parkinson's disease later in life. There's a connection there we don't completely understand. So if we can understand more about REM behavior disorder, we can understand more about Parkinson's disease. So coming back to my background as an astronomer and a physicist, we will look at EMG data and EEG data from people with REM behavior disorder. The EEG data, we're looking at the activity in their brain. What we're looking for is when they enter REM sleep. The EMG data is looking at muscle tone in the body during sleep. During those REM sleep cycles, your body should be paralyzed. You shouldn't be seeing muscle tone activity. But in people with REM behavior disorder, the muscle is active. So I look at data, especially in our lab at the Portland VA hospital system under Dr. Miranda Lim. We are unusual in that we have both simultaneously a human side of our studies and an animal branch of the lab. So we can study disorders simultaneously, both in people clinically and as research studies, and using these animal models. So my colleague, Dr. Carolyn Tinsley, and I are looking especially at animal models of REM behavior disorder to try and understand what's going on. So I will look at this data again, coming back to me as an astronomer and a physicist. So when I studied at University College London, looking at very large mirrors, one thing that's important is the shape of the mirror. So there are two, when we're talking about an ultra precision optic, there are two characteristics of the optic that we're really concerned with. So the first is the form of the mirror. And in order to bring light to a focus using mirrors, you have to have a curved mirror. We're aiming for a parabolic mirror. So you've got to get
Mm,
that curvature right in order to produce an image in the best possible focus. So
mm,
we call that the form. And you're never going to get, and there is no such thing as perfection in engineering. So you'll measure the form of your mirror. And this was a difficult challenge in this particular project because we were taking this 39-meter across parabola and breaking it into 798 pieces. So each of those pieces was a segment of the parabola. So you had to make sure that your curvature was exactly right. So that's your form error. The other
mm,
thing that we were concerned about is what we call surface texture. So it's possible that you could have an optic that is in specification for its form error. You've got the correct curvature in it, but you could have bad surface texture. And surface texture is something like ripples in the surface. An extreme example of undesirable surface texture would be something like a CD or a DVD. It's got all those grooves in it. And if you play with a CD or a DVD, you get that rainbow effect. And that's
mm,
because you're diffracting the light. It's interfering with itself and creating a rainbow. We really don't want that on the surface of a telescope. And this was an issue for us because we were using robots to create this perfect form.
mm,
And those robots would raster back and forth. They would pass back and forth across the surface. And we would actually result in this regular surface texture that would create a diffraction pattern on the surface of the mirror. So one of the challenges that I did as a mathematician, so I did double major in astrophysics and math as an undergraduate, and I got to apply my math background, is taking the toolpath of our robots and randomizing it to completely randomize the surface, get rid of any periodic surface texture, and get rid of that tendency for light to interfere with itself. The way that we would test this is that we would have this tiny probe, very sensitive probe that would travel across the surface of the mirror, and you could measure the surface texture. So I got used to looking at this data. I would take the Fourier transform of the surface and look for any periodic structures. So my brain is kind of trained to look for that sort of thing. What kind of texture do we have? So coming back to the muscle tone data, the EMG data, I'm used to looking at that data, that muscle twitches. I'm not really thinking of it the way a physician or a neurologist might think of it as, here's a physiological action. I'm seeing the texture, and it's second nature to me to write the software to do this analysis to find these periodic movements. And I found that to be very helpful looking at this data to just look at the complexity of it to try and figure out when are we having these weird spikes. So that's one thing that I've found useful from my background. Another aspect of my background that's been useful is as an astronomer, you do a lot of image processing. And that was something I did a lot of observational work as an undergraduate. So I learned a lot about scientific image processing, and that is helpful in our work. We work with MRI data. We have a machine called a functional ultrasound that takes ultrasound images. We use it with rodents, so it's in real time. We can have the rodents exposed to different situations. We can take these live ultrasounds of their brain and see where the brain is metabolizing at different rates, which tells us where is the brain active. So we can use that to look at social behaviors. We can also watch as these rodents go through their sleep cycles. And that image processing background has helped in working with the data from our functional ultrasound facility.
lot of interesting things. I'm thinking where should I start? Do you see some similarities? You said the shape of the mirror and then the EEG electrodes around the head, which is spherical. Do you see some similarities there? How to analyze EEG? EEG is challenging to understand.
It
What does
is.
it really represent? So yeah.
It is very challenging, and one of our projects in our group, we're a very active and varied group. We have a lot of interests, and one of our interests is looking at the relationship between sleep and Alzheimer's disease. And we have one study that we're carrying out in collaboration with the medical school at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're looking at, we have a full night of polysomnography data from several research volunteers who have been diagnosed with active Alzheimer's disease. So this gives us this window into seeing what the brain is doing during sleep when also dealing with the challenge of having an active Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. And we're looking at specific oscillations, frequencies in the brain, but we're looking at it at different leads to try and see, is there coherence in these slow oscillations? And it's thought that the slow oscillations in the EEG represent the brain sort of clearing itself out during the phase of deep sleep, that N3 sleep. So we are doing analysis there to try and see, when does that occur simultaneously. And like you said, EEG data is difficult. EEG, it's fantastic in that it's non-invasive. It's an easy way to study the brain, but it's a method where you're studying the brain. You're going, through the scalp, through the hair, through the skull. You have all these layers of tissue to reach the brain
Mm,
tissue, and you're not looking at the firings of individual neurons. You're picking up groups of hundreds or thousands of neurons all firing about the same time. So again, like you said, what does that mean? So it's so when with EEG, you have to keep in mind that you're looking at, you're not looking at individual neurons, you're looking at populations of neurons who are
mm.
working together. So it is difficult data to work with, but it's very, very interesting.
So you said that you are looking for coherence, you looking for slow oscillations and clearing of the brain. Is it that there's neural activity which is clearing the brain from the biochemical waste products? I'm not an expert. What's happening there? Can you explain us a little bit?
It's a theory these are new discoveries, and I too am not an expert here, but there is a function of the brain. We think it's called the glymphatic system.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's believed that during this deep stage of sleep, the N3 sleep, the brain sort of oscillates at this slow frequency together in coherence, and that helps clear out these proteins, like these tau proteins that we
Hmm.
know, or amyloid beta, that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. And we know of this association because people have done post-mortem examinations of the brains of people who passed away from Alzheimer's disease and were generous enough to donate their brains for research. And we see that these proteins build up in people with
Hmm.
Alzheimer's disease. So we know that there's an association. And it's thought that this process clears out the brain, and that's why in a healthy brain those proteins don't continue to accumulate day after day
Hmm.
after day. So the thought is that, well, what's going wrong in the brain with Alzheimer's disease? Why are these proteins accumulating? And so we're trying to study during that particular deep phase of sleep what's happening in this brain with Alzheimer's disease. Are we seeing this slow wave oscillation? And is it coherent? Is it happening at the
Hmm.
same time in
Yeah.
different areas of the brain?
Yeah. No, very interesting. And do you see any similarities other than what we discussed already with the astrophysics and the EEG analysis?